All right, welcome to the final installment of the International Leadership Series for 22-23. The topic this year has focused on power and governance. My name is Dr. Nicholas Hudson, and my hope is that throughout the course of this year and the six speakers that you have had an opportunity to really understand this year's theme, one of the elements of global citizenship. And historically, we've looked at sustainability, social justice and equity, human rights, peace and conflict is next year, identity and diversity. This year, we focused on power and governance, and then eventually we'll talk about global citizenship and interdependence. These are the 7 elements of global citizenship as defined by Oxfam. As an international institution, we hope that at the time that you graduate, you will have developed some of these skill sets as you go off into the workplace. Some of you in this room, this is fulfilling the International Leadership Fellow for you. You participated in the Art for Social Change, as well as you'll be honored a week from today with one of the most prestigious awards that the university provides, a medal for being an International Leadership Fellow. And throughout this year, we've talked a little bit about social justice and what does that mean? It means the full inclusion of everyone in benefits of society and to participate in the cultural, economic, political, and social life holistically. We've also looked and continue to have conversations as it relates to power, right? The ability or an official authority to decide what is best for others, right? And so when we've looked at the lens of government this year, right? Power and governance really looks at government. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about free speech and satire within politics. And we've looked at this idea of governance holistically as the process of interactions through laws, norms, power, and language of an organized society. The last one we had in March, we talked about the state legislature. The state legislature is still going on right now. And in fact, as we talk at this moment, they are determining specific laws as it relates to our capacity as institutions of higher education to even engage in conversations related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, related to tenure, the ability for faculty to have the capacity to share their thoughts, to share their beliefs and values. Not saying yours are wrong, or theirs are right, but to at least engage in a dialogue around some of the more critical topics facing us as a society. And so governance right now is taking place in Austin specifically as we look through that. We have also talked a little bit about throughout this time, what is privilege, right? Privilege is the unearned access to resources only readily available to some people as a result of your advantage social group membership. All of you right now are privileged to be in a space of higher learning, right? But some of you may be privileged off of your social group identities. I'm not saying that's good or bad, it's just access to resources that you haven't had historically. We've also discussed oppression that maintains advantage and disadvantage based on social group membership through individual, institutional, and cultural levels. So today we're going to talk about public space and citizen engagement in the political process through political satire. And I think this is going to be an exciting opportunity for us to really hear from one of our esteemed faculty members, Dr. Menhaj Momin, who's an assistant professor of
associate professor political science and public administration.
Administration, political science. And I think this is a relevant topic, right? We continue to see through FIRE, which is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression and Education, the institutions of higher education, and others in the public sphere engage in political satire. And we're going to learn about political satire, and she's going to lead us in a conversation today. So I'm super excited to bring her here. Let's give her a best of all welcome here.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about myself. So I've been at TAMU for 20 years, and I teach political science and public administration. I'm from Bangladesh, which is a small country in between India and Myanmar. I grew up there, did my undergrad, worked actually, like a couple of years in a nonprofit. Then I went to Canada and I did my master's there. Then I did my PhD from Cleveland State, and then I came here. Okay. So my first book was about citizenship, and I looked at the, kind of the gap between the actual policies, which I call reality, and the rhetoric, the other events. And basically my premise was the gap between the reality and rhetoric was constructed intentionally, because most of the interesting things and most of the changes happen in that gap, not at the policy level. Okay. And I'm not going to talk about any, like of my other research, but just to, give you an idea, who I am, where I'm coming from. And second book is the one that I'm going to focus on today, is this political satire, postmodern reality, and the Trump presidency. Who are we laughing at? Here, what I did was I looked over, it was actually, I use satire in my national government's, state government classes all the time, but I was very frustrated because I couldn't find a rational framework to explain how satire has, politics and satire has merged. And, a concept that I'm going to talk about, today, the infotainment, right? I couldn't find a rational framework. So I was probing. And then basically, when, the Trump campaign started, it felt like, okay, now I'll have the answer, but actually it made it even more confusing. So I actually had to go back and look at the structural changes which allowed for infotainment, okay? And that's the part that I'm going to, talk about today. Okay. Okay. Then I have a memoir which is about growing up in Bangladesh when the country was going through a lot of transition. And the last book that I'm waiting, listening to Laredo. This will come out in September, and this actually like explains the transition of Laredo from the voices of the people. But now let me ask you a question. What is public space? How would you define public space? Anyone? Yes. Yes, but also, yes.
Any space considered free or accessible to everybody?
Yes. Yeah.
Space.
Yeah. For your example, yeah, Camus actually is a public space. In many instances, it's a public space, but also parts of Camus can be restricted. Not everyone from the community has access to everywhere, right? So parts of it where we have the access, that could be the public space. But more than the access, what is also important is how the spaces are constructed, who controls it, who has real access to it. Okay. And if you look at public space, it's actually a very important component of citizenship, because that's where the citizens are, supposed to engage, right? And that's also one of the spaces where the power of all the citizens, again, theoretically, should be, equal or at par, right? Where people could engage freely. Now, when we talk about public space, another important component is a digital public space, okay? So all of these issues about access, control have become even more complicated, because a lot of time it's very difficult to see, or, what is the tangible, factor, in terms of, controlling that space. Another important part is when we talk about public space, like whether we are talking about, like a physical space, or whether we are talking about, especially when we are talking about digital public space, we see this phenomena where the public spaces have become disjointed, which basically means groups of citizens, they have access, or this is what they prefer, a particular kind of public space. So the whole idea that everyone could engage and everyone would have a free, flowing discussion, that's actually not happening. So instead of, our notion was, yes, we will have different layers of public space that would be, but mostly in terms of region. But now we are seeing ideologically public space are very divided. Then, of course, the other two questions are who are the participants, and, very important question, who controls the public space? And in terms of how the public space are constructed, we have to look at the restriction, who are not allowed in the space. And a lot of time, very easy to look at the construction of the public space is often through the minority rights, right? And of course, technology has changed the whole construction of the public space, and the power of public space, I think, in terms of the virtual public space, I mean, that has become sometimes probably even more powerful than the physical public space. Okay. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the history of, satire in America. Now, political satire in America has been always, present, and has been present as a very important political tool. Okay. So there are instances in history, like for instance, if you look at the American Revolution, you'll actually find a lot of cartoons, right? I mean, but that was the art of technology at that time, right? You'll find a lot of, critique against the British done in the cartoon form, right? There were poems, right? Satirical poems, written. When we talk about the Civil War, you'll find a huge number of, both supporting, let's say Lincoln or satirizing Lincoln. I mean, that happened. And again, at that time, we are talking about like newspapers. We are talking about, again, in terms of, cartoon or other satire, right? That was a very, very, important, space. Okay. But another important part, what Dr. Hudson was talking about in terms of freedom of speech, political satire also has a very interesting kind of, root in terms of, freedom of speech. Actually, political satire, many people claim, or many theorists claim, starts from a very famous trial in American history, which is called the Zenger trial. So this is, so this is back in 1734. The New York Weekly Journal and its publisher, John Peter Zenger, were brought to court, for seditious libel by Governor William Cosby of New York. What happened during the trial is actually something is very, very important, because the lawyers who were supporting Zenger, they actually, what they did was, they defended Zenger as a form of parody. Okay, so the whole, the process of the trial actually became very important, and that trial actually, the sentence was in favor of Zenger, right? I mean, so in the newspaper, if a politician is satirized, that cannot be libel. Okay, so that's many people claim is a very important part where satire is actually been given that freedom, to make fun of anyone. So here are some, so this is for the Zenger trial. This is like one of the cartoons during the Revolution War. This is again, very, very problematic. But if you go to the Library of Congress, you'll actually find a lot of, cartoons about, American Revolution, about the Civil War. Some of it might not be politically, correct, but this were, very important form of, dialogue between the supporters and opposers. Now, what is also important is satire actually maintained this like very, very strong, satire actually maintained this very strong form of political tool, and actually became almost like a radical. You'll find, if you look at American history, a lot of very important critique of American empire that actually came from satire, that came via satire. Okay, one very important critique, you're probably, you're aware of Mark Twain, right? But Mark Twain was not only a very famous writer, he was a, obviously very famous satirist, but he also had a very strong political ideology. I think he went to, prison for a couple of days because of his opposition of the Spanish-American, war. Okay, so we actually find, if you go back in history, a lot of the satirists, they had very strong political positions, and they were, and the important part is, their opposition was often not in the mainstream, but rather in the what we call the counterculture. Okay, another important satirist I mentioned is Lenny Bruce, which is again kind of jumping because we are talking about the 1960s here. but let me show you. Okay, so this is a magazine. This is like from the 1930s. So this is a magazine that is actually critiquing the, like Uncle Sam, right? American empire, how it is, growing. There was a lot of criticism when America acquired Hawaii, right? So a lot of it actually happened in this space. Okay. This is like, again, I'm because of the time, I'm, kind of, jumping. And this is actually one of the period where a lot of change happened in satire. So in that sense, Lenny Bruce is very important. This is, I'm not going to read from here. So he had very, very strong, like political, ideology. He was very critical of the American government. But what is important is he actually was really, he was again and again, he was charged with obscenity and was imprisoned again and again. And actually, he was a very, like a very powerful satirist, and he died like completely. He was in debt, like his health was in a very bad, like he was doing very poorly, and most of it is because how like rapidly he was being imprisoned again and again. And as you can see, he had like very, very, strong positions on a number of, American, policies. Then when we have television, what would you expect? What would happen to satire? What would be the expectation? Yes. Yeah, but from cartoon now, there is like more of a space, right? I mean, for the first time, technology allows it. I mean, just like, internet, I mean, you can think about that time, this is the new technology, right? You would expect, okay, there will be more satire, right? But actually what happened in the 1960s, there was a, there was divergence. As real political, powerful political satire actually remained in the counterculture. Okay, that didn't count, that was not allowed in the television screen. What was allowed in the television screen was very, like a sterile satire, because the whole idea was, this is a, like the whole family is watching, right? So what can be heard in the living room and what cannot be heard. So even anything that had any kind of political component, that was actually, what is acceptable and what is not, right? That was the main issue. And the time, what allowed political satire was the criticism of Nixon. Okay, after the Watergate scandal, when Johnny Carson criticized or made satire of President Nixon, that was the time it was okay, it was acceptable, to do make fun of politicians. But also a very important component, the way Nixon was satirized. It was always about a personality trait of a politician. Okay, and we will see that this trait, or what can be laughed at and what cannot be laughed at. This rule was almost, like I won't say rule, like a norm, right? I mean that norm developed. But very importantly, another important part, and I'll talk about, yeah. So satire, the powerful political satire actually remained in the counterculture. They were not allowed in the television screen. Okay, and the television provided, if you look at anything, in the 1960s, what was going on in the country, right? I mean, in terms of like, civil rights, right? You'll see a very small portion of that was reflected in any television program, because that was thought, this is not, this is not acceptable, for all the audience. Okay. And, I talked about the President Nixon, and I'll mention George Carlin, because he's actually one of the figures who was, very strong part of the counterculture, but much later in his life, he was one of the few people who was allowed, right? I mean, on the television screen. So he's actually one of the figures who have been, in both of the spheres. And now I want to talk, kind of give you two examples. If you look at the Saturday Night Live started around the early 1970s, but before that in the 1960s, there were a couple of, programs which were, satire in American television. One was the Smother Brothers Comedy Hour. This was canceled over 2 songs, okay? And here, this is Pete Seeger's famous song, Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, and this is just the last, paragraph, that I'm showing you. So this was a very powerful criticism of Vietnam War. Okay, so this is actually something, you should look up. I mean, the song is just beautiful, and the power of that, song, right? So this song was televised in the Smother Brothers, comedy hour, and this was actually too much, right? I mean, this was too radical, criticizing the Vietnam War. And then there was another song by Harry Belafonte, "Don't Stop the Carnival," which is actually, the song doesn't look, any like any critique, but the way that song was done, that was the time where in Chicago, there was a riot during the Democratic Party's convention. Okay. So what was going on was he was singing this song, which is like, it sounds like, it's talking about a carnival, but at the, what was playing on the television screen was the pictures of that riot. Okay, so that gave the song a completely different meaning, right? So because of these two songs, this Mother Brothers comedy hour was canceled, So basically the limit, right? And what kind of political criticism can be allowed in satire and what cannot be allowed. Okay, now in the 1990s, for the first time, satire was allowed in the mainstream television. And this was actually, in my book, this is one of the central themes. Like, why? In the 1960s, we are setting all these obstacles, right? I mean, what we can discuss and what we cannot. In the 1990s, why do we do that? And before we talk about some of the characteristics here, I want to talk about some structural changes that happened in the 1990s, okay? These are some of the very important regulations that we got rid of. One is the Fairness Doctrine, one is the FinCEN rules, and the media ownership. Fairness Doctrine, another important concept is, before the 1990s, the definition of television was, this is for public interest. So there are a number of regulations, when there's something, anything that is defined as, related with public interest, there are certain regulations that has to be, you have to abide by, right? But that whole public interest part was taken off. Okay. The Fairness Doctrine basically says, whenever we are talking about an issue, we have to, or in the television, whenever they're presenting an issue, they have to present both sides, right? I mean, the pros and the cons, in support, in opposition, right? Otherwise, they are not allowed to do that. So we got rid of that in 1987. The FinCEN rules is the Financial Interest and Syndication rules, which is the Federal Communication Commission, which basically, used to have where the three big television networks were stopped from monopolizing broadcasting landscape, and they couldn't own the program that they were airing in the prime time. And the media ownership is much easier. Like if you're talking about a corporation, what kind of what percentage, what share of media is allowed, right? I mean, so we had a restriction that nobody can own, or one corporation cannot own more than 49% of the media ownership, but we got rid of that. So technically, it's possible for anyone to own even 100% of it. So these are very important changes, which I argue that change satire and brought satire from the counterculture, from the edge to the mainstream. Okay, so so when the 1990 FCC regulation were taken off, satire could be presented on television. Now, what was also happening was there was less competition among the basically media networks, right? So when there's less competition, they are not actually trying to get each other's audiences. Rather, they resort to another technique, which is called narrowcasting, where you deepen your loyalty, where you try to get, you make sure that the audience that you're getting, they will always watch your shows, rather than trying to attract the audience from other networks. Okay, so this is what allowed different kind of political satire, from different political ideologies on the televisions. Because, they're not thinking about, okay, if I'm too radical, if I'm too leftist, I'm going to lose the audience. No, this is the audience you have, and you have to actually just like cater to them, right? And the same goes for, let's say, any comedian who's like, more, whose ideology is right wing, right? They're not afraid, or they're not scared, or they're not even trying to get our audience, from other network. Rather, they want to make sure that what they're, presenting, that their audience is actually is entertained by that. Okay, and then another important change that happened in the 1990s, I would say, the Daily Show. Jon Stewart, he was actually one of the first people to critique the Iraq War. Now that 20 years have gone by, and American government has kind of said, oh, we made a mistake. I really think that's a crime. With a made up reason, you go and destroy a country and actually destroy the whole region, right? But it's very, very important to remember who were the ones who were speaking against that. Okay, so this actually, more than any kind of real journalist, that came from a satire show, and also Onion. If you're familiar with that, the very the parody magazine, right? That started as I think on the campus, right? I mean, it's a student magazine, but now it has a lot more audience, right? They were also one of the few sites where they had criticism of the Iraq War. Okay, but again, so in one sense, if you look at the history of American political satire, that kind of strong a strong tradition of challenging the government, right? I mean, that was present. But very soon we see something else that happened, which often we call this infotainment, where the information and entertainment actually merges together, right? And this is actually, I mean, the Daily Show by Jon Stewart is a really wonderful example, because a lot of time, at that time, because there was so little criticism of the Bush presidency and Iraq War, a lot of the information was coming from there. Okay, so it's actually, at that time we were talking about, oh my God, I mean, this is like wonderful, we have another source of information. Okay, but infotainment is not only when satire gives you the information, but also, another important component, another important change happened in American television, where we see news actually started following the format of satire. So infotainment is not only satire is providing you the information, but where you expect the information, right? They have changed their format. Sometimes it's even very difficult to tell, which one is real news, which one is satirizing. Okay, and a huge part of that actually goes back to the structural changes we made in media. Okay, we often talk about, when we talk about Trump presidency, we talk about let's say, all of the negative things. Okay, but I think a really important question is why it was possible for him to win the presidency. You actually have to look at all of the changes that happened in politics and even on the television, right? I mean, which actually allowed him, kind of tools, right? I mean, to reach out to his, supporters and really win a campaign, win a political, presidency. Okay, so, okay, I've talked about that. Okay, so, why is satire important? Because now a lot of political information, we are not only getting it from satire, but satire often provides the frame, which basically means how we understand the information. I mean, there are so much information around, right? When we hear the information, we often get it in a rational way, and anything that is not included in the frame, we often don't even think about. Okay, so satire actually has become a very important, a tool which frames certain issues, right? I mean, in terms of corruption, they might laugh at, certain personalities in a certain way, right? And we focus on that. Sometimes, that can actually divert our attention from the more important. Sometimes it can bring our attention to the most important part that is missed, by the real media. So satire, I mean, these are the three things I think that has happened, how satire is functioning in American, American political landscape, is satire has now become a partisan creed. that is actually very, very different from the role American satire played, because it was always part of the counterculture. What it was doing, it was always challenging the state, the government, whoever the government was, right? And basically all of the principles of the society. But when satire becomes partisan, then the focus becomes, you are only critiquing. I mean, if you're, well, right now, there is a very popular, like all networks, they have actually, they want, more and more satirics, because that's actually one of the ways they get, more audience, right? So Gutfeld in the Fox television, I mean, he's very, popular, okay? So if you look at it, all of the satire is coming, from there is a criticism of the Democratic government or Biden administration. And likewise, if you go to the, let's say anything that is available on CNN, MSNBC, you'll actually see a lot of criticism about the, let's say Trump or Republican government. Let me ask you something. You have all, heard about the Ohio rail disaster, right? I mean, where the trains carrying really hazardous material, they basically flipped over and they had to put fire to that hazardous material. So we are talking about a small town in Ohio, East Palestine, about 5,000 people who will probably, I don't know how many, they will probably get cancer. Like there's really health concerns. All of their water, soil has been contaminated. They have lost their property. They have all lost, their life savings, property value. Because, I'm pretty sure no one will be ever able to sell anything from there, right? That the media, the mainstream media didn't even cover it, right? And the Fox News only covered it in terms of the criticism of the Biden administration, which is fine because how they handled it, there's a lot to be criticized. Okay, but the more important questions are like, why did it happen? Because there was a regulation during Obama administration, right? I mean, where it was watered down. So basically, this company, Norfolk, rail company, they paid I think $6.5 billion for campaign contribution, and they took out the part where, like in the original legislation, one of the conditions was that you have to update the brake, right, with electrical brake. Okay, so they basically said no, it's too costly. They didn't do that. Okay, and on top of that, in terms of we talk about or the Biden administration claims like how they're very much pro-environment, right? But if you look at what happened there, they are what they did, or let me put it this way, what they didn't do, doesn't show that they are very much, pro-environment, right? But a lot of important things is not only about what particular administration does or doesn't do, but the whole structure. Why did it happen? Because if we don't get rid of this kind of campaign finance, influences, then it might, something else very similar, something else will happen, right? But there was almost no focus, and in anything that was, I mean, I talked about this in the class. Anything that I learned about it, I got it from independent media. Okay, and again, there was a lot of kind of satirizing Biden administration, or there was, and again, that's not. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with that part, but that's a very, very small part. Okay, so when satire becomes partisan, what we lose out is the real criticism about the structured problems. So American satire historically had provided that role, but it's not doing that anymore. Satire as political engagement. Now, this is also something where at the very beginning with the Daily Show, with Colbert, we thought, okay, this is actually young people are interested in satire. So this is a, very interesting tool, which actually makes the younger, population more engaged in politics, right? But the engagement often stops at a very superficial level. You see that, you kind of, you have an emotional response, and that stops there. So whether or not it leads to actual political engagement, even something as basic as counting at whether in terms of, voter turnout has, increased. But if voter turnout is, again, you have to remember, is just one component, that's not going to change a lot of the, political situation. And another important issue that has, like many people claim, that actually theories, some people claim that satire has increased the political engagement and therefore is affecting something really good. Then there are some theories who claim satire, what it does is, it is actually normalizing the bizarre. So we keep on hearing that, right? And it becomes normalized, and we are basically, we just glance over it, and we are, that doesn't, the emotion that is needed, to be angry, right? That doesn't, like happen anymore because it's just too much. And one of the, probably the best example, would be President Trump's, time, right? I mean, it was actually almost impossible to satirize him because, he was providing so much information, you couldn't make it funny, right? But let me go back and give you another example. This, I think, is one of the very important example when we had Sarah Palin and Saturday Night Live. They actually, what they did was, this is, what's her name? Tina Fey, right? I mean, playing Sarah Palin, right? But this is something very important because this, this particular piece, Saturday Night didn't have a script. Tina Fey literally read what Sarah Palin has, like literally, so there was an interview by, Katie Curry, right? I mean, which they were satirizing, but they didn't have a script, like literally Tina Fey was reading. I mean, only she added just some words, for emphasizing, like, those are not real. So basically the script was the actual script, okay? And this, I think, is a point where the politics and entertainment completely merged, like the infotainment. And these are, two quotes from a Meghan McCain book, but look at it, how when she's criticizing Sarah Palin, she's using like Saturday Night Live, right? I mean, using satire. So basically satire and real news, they have merged in such a way, it's very, very difficult to separate. And I'll talk about another example here. You see President Obama, and if you remember his anger translator, right? It was very funny. So the whole idea was, what Obama couldn't say, what he would say with a straight face, the anger translator would basically come in and say, okay, this is really in his mind. But this is also a very important, example about how satire becomes partisan. Because historically, when we are talking about Saturday Night Live or any satire, what they do is they want to make fun of the president. So the president is brought down a peg or two, and we can laugh at him, right? And he's at our level. But by allowing the President Obama this anger translator, what was going on was, we were not laughing at Obama, but we were laughing at the people who were laughing at Obama, right? Who are angry at Obama, right? And he was very funny, right? But this is also, I think, a very important part in American, political satire, where there was a reluctance to make any fun of Obama from the, mainstream, I don't want to call it left, but mainstream, except for Fox News. And what they were making fun of was also the wrong reason. Those were not the right criticism, but there was a lot to be criticized. Like, for instance, if you think about, Flint, Michigan, the water crisis, right? I mean, Obama was never held accountable, right? And that's actually, I think that's a, crime. I mean, if the government cannot provide safe, water, why the government is there, right? And at many levels, the city level, state level, federal level, right? I mean, the government should have been held accountable, but it was never done, okay? So these are kind of the examples I'm giving you, what I think satire has become very partisan, and you get it from, both parties. But now, remember the disjointed public space I was talking about? So satire used to be that one space where people would go, people would laugh at it. You might not agree with it, but, usually you would be able to, laugh at it, right? But now satire is, because it became partisan, it is actually disjointed space. So if you believe in a particular ideology, you will get your satire from one space. And if you believe in another ideology, you are going to get another, from another space. And you do never have to engage. Never. It's like mutually exclusive, works. So This is like political satire, which was like very, very ideological. It has become very, partisan. And again, when it makes fun of, any event, it makes fun of very, like a small part of it, makes fun of the anomalies, but not the actual, actual system. For instance, I mean, if you think about war, right? Iraq war, there was a lot of satirizing of the Bush administration's incompetence, right? I mean, there were a lot, right? But it was never connected with American foreign policy, right? I mean, Iraq war is not an exception. Like there are other places we have gone and said, oops, we made a mistake, right? And we keep on continuing that. So there was no structural critique of, why do we keep on doing that? Rather, the focus is on one particular, event. And, I think normalizing the absurd, has become, so satire has kind of lost its edge because we have used it so much and we have used it in a way to reach out to, kind of like-minded people, but not to, actually make a point that actually reaches everyone, right? So that has already happened. And another very, very important component in satire is there has to be a self-reflection. When you're laughing, this is often called the mirror effect. When you're laughing at something, you should be able to realize, oh, I do the same thing, or oh, this is similar, right? But now satire is actually all focused on external, right? I mean, if you're critiquing Trump, if you're critiquing Biden, if you're, whoever you are critiquing, any kind of political personality, that's what you critique, right? And you don't look back at yourself and think about, okay, this is like, the people I believe in or the politicians I vote for, they do something like that. There is no self-reflection there anymore. And I think that there is an acceptance of the overall political system. So all the critique are, focused on personalities, but not on the system. And that is because satire has become, as I was saying, very partisan. And again, we are now, the public space has, enlarged, right? I mean, like in terms of virtual. So we have we all reside in our, disjointed spaces, and we don't have to engage with anyone who doesn't believe in our same idea. Okay. So I'll stop here and let's have a, discussion, I would like that.
Great, thank you, Dr. Moment. Let's go ahead here to discussion. You got your hand up right there, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Actually, in reference to satire, when you're talking, let's say, political, what did you find out what a word or description is for somebody that's laughing and looking at something, but deep inside, they resent it? Let's say people that are behind Trump, they laugh at satire, but deep inside, they have that kind of resentment.
Okay, there are, I don't have anything exactly, in terms of what you said, but if you go back to theory, there are different kinds of satire, right? Some satire that are supposed to be just, just critique, something, right? I mean, then some are, more gentlemanly, but some are, as you said, this actually provides people an avenue to, for their emotion, right? I mean, it actually allows people to connect, okay? But most of the satire that is happening now, I think is only, you just critique something and there is no kind of back and forth. It's only
on the face value of.
Yeah, I mean, you do it and you are, done. It doesn't, yeah, I mean, there isn't the mirror effect. And also, because it focuses on a narrow thing, something, like let's say sex scandal, which is very easy to make fun of, right? And so you see that, and again, there is no, there is no connection to any other issues, any other broader issues.
It doesn't go deeper.
Yeah. But American satire actually has a very rich history where it used to go deeper. This would be one of the places, even people who may think, oh, this is like very coarse language, but they would hear and they would say, okay, there is some truth, right? And I think that's the thing that is missing. I mean, we have much more satire, but we have much more sanitized satire, and we have satire that are much more, there is a, what should I say? I mean, there is an agenda for that satire, and that actually kills the satire.
More offensive.
Yeah. Yes.
Funny.
I think one of the ways to balance at least today's version of satire is to basically start calling out the elephant in the room, like individuals and groups. Because there's a lot of passiveness, a lot of acceptance, and like I guess how you brought up with Trump and with Obama earlier, they're using the tools to their benefit, right? And a lot of people are starting to use those tools to their own benefit, so it becomes normalized. So if you make a cartoon, well, they made a cartoon of themselves already, so it holds no effect. And I think people just need to start getting serious and just like stop with the satire. Oh, it's wrong. This is why, and it's not funny. That's what needs to be done.
But there was, and yeah, I agree with what you're saying, but the satire, when it was in counterculture, it used to make people angry. You look at something and say, oh my God, this is how they are making us, put up. I mentioned George Carlin, right? I mean, he's actually one person, check him out. I mean, he might be one of my most favorite, one. Okay. And he actually made very important point, very powerful critique without, forced language or anything. And it's very, you hear him and it's very persuasive, language. Okay. But the other, aspect of it is, you used to hear that and used to get angry, but now satire actually doesn't, we laugh at that and we think, okay, this is what the other person is doing, right? But we don't get angry at the overall system. So that's also something that, is completely missing, is not present in satire.
Yeah, and I think part of satire has historically been ingrained in the American culture, right? So if you think back to prior to the American Revolution, there was a lot of satire that took place. Even in the songs that we had, we're going to be talking about this in my next class right now, protest songs. Protest songs have existed since the dawn of American society, including, for example, the song Yankee Doodle Dandy, which we know today, that was a protest song, right? And that was in some ways satirizing the British. So we use it against them in this kind of counterculture that exists. It has often historically been, to get to your point, Rick, there's been a critique. Where it is right now, and I think what Dr. Momin is saying is, it is no longer a critique, right? It's not critiquing the larger system at play. It's playing on individual traits. I think back to Chevy Chase in Saturday Night Live. This is Chevy Chase. You're all like, you have no idea who this guy is, but he was in Caddyshack and a whole bunch of other movies back in the day. The Griswolds with the Christmas Family Vacation or Family Vacation, whatever. He satirized George Ford, not George Ford, Harold Ford, whatever, Ford, President Ford, whatever the guy is.
President 1 year.
Yeah, not Harrison Ford. President Ford, Gerald Ford is his name, Gerald Ford.
Yes.
Satirized that he used to be a football player at University of Michigan. And so you would think that a football player is very coordinated, right? But one incident that he had where he stumbled, the president stumbled on the national stage, then became a national satire with Chevy Chase always acting out on stage on Saturday Night Live, making fun of one specific trait, one specific instance. It's now synonymous with Gerald Ford being clumsy.
But he was the most athletic president
we've ever had.
Yeah,
exactly, right? So you could say the same thing happened with George W. Bush, with
his mispronunciation, right? I mean, that was the focus, but not really
the critique of the American
very important policies, like
his policies that he did, right? So John Stewart and all of the Samantha Bee and all of those would make fun of specific aspects of George W. Bush or his political cronies, whether it's Rumsfeld or whoever it was, Dick Cheney. That they would make Dick Cheney out to be Darth Vader, right? Locked away in some retreat area, right? But they didn't critique the larger system at play.
I would just a small disagreement. I think Jon Stewart, compared to any other satirist, was the one who I think focused much more on the structural critique.
In some ways, I think what has transpired since then it has been we've lost the critique of the system, of the government. And I think that's the last point. We now accept our political system as being bifurcated in this way of like left versus right versus critiquing like Obama did some pretty messed up things. And we as society didn't critique him through satire the same way we did with Bush, or if there was satire, it was only from the right. And the left were like, nope, I'm not even gonna look at it anymore. And I think that's an important part. It has played a historical role in where we're at. I mean, political cartoons criticize FDR.
Yeah,
If you think
yeah.
back at
very coarse language, very powerful language. Actually,
And-
one of the chapters in my book is how different presidents are framed. And if you look at Saturday Night Live, right, they often provide this frame, and everyone like looks at that and tries to think of the president or the candidate in that frame. The two candidates who never accepted that frame for satire was Al Gore and Hillary Clinton. And it's very, very interesting because then the whole idea or the criticism is they have like, we don't know who they are because they actually fought back against how they were being portrayed.
Correct. And then if you think back to when Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, she went on stage with the person that played her, right? In a way to say like, there's some similarities, but to say like we're different in many ways was at least the message that some folks received. But I do think that there's this a space for it to say in the way it's being done right now. And when I was in college 20 years ago, The Onion was very popular. Most of you today wouldn't even know what The Onion is, right? Right, The Onion is a newspaper. It was there on college campuses. We don't even have The Onion available for you all to read, but it would satirize news, not just political news, but news across the board.
Yeah.
You can follow it on Facebook if you'd like, but that's kind of or Instagram, that they have like fake news profile or like news headlines, excuse me. What other questions, comments, or just offers? Yeah.
I think an important part of it was what you mentioned that satire is protected from being considered liable. And so I feel like that makes these things lies, outright lies, the truth in the eyes of a lot of the American public.
I now I have to add something else. Like there is a person who I think on Twitter, he basically he tweeted that you can vote for Hillary Clinton on Twitter or something like that. And he said this was a parody because he never thought that people would be so stupid to believe that. But he has been charged with voter fraud. And seriously, no. See, I mean, like there has been a sentence, right? And there are a lot of I mean, it goes back to kind of freedom of speech, right? I mean, and again, I mean, if anyone just tweets like something stupid, right? And if that they are saying I don't know how they would like prove that has convinced many voters not to vote, right? But he has been charged with voter fraud. So this is actually one of the issues, that they're talking about, like who defines what is a parody? What was the intention, and or if you are going by the intention, or if you're looking at like what was the outcome, did it really achieve that? And then whether or not he should be charged with something, yes.
And that sounds actually gonna say, it turns more to like a free speech issue. And also, actual platforms like content moderation, like who decides, not just the law itself, but like there are companies who decides who gets to say what and what is true, what is not. That's everything. Some things are disputed, but to some people it's true, to some people it's false. And who decides who gets the truth variable, let's just say.
And I don't know whether the AI ChatGPT has a sense of humor or not. And if it does, then it's yeah, it will be even more complicated, right?
Yeah.
Because already Elon Musk, I looked at the interview he did with Tucker Carlson. So he's actually proposing that he will come up with another AI version, because the whole idea is, I mean, if you have used it, it's just like within a few seconds, right? So much information is available. But this is also very interesting. AI is also learning by itself. And even the people who have made AI, they don't know how they are learning. Okay. So I was looking actually at one, seriously, one
That's scary.
documentary where the AI was asked a question in Bengali, and it kind of, sparked my interest. That's my native language. So AI was never taught anything in any other language, and within a few seconds, it was able to respond in that language. Okay, and they don't know how it, how it was taught, but now they are saying what is the source of information. Okay, and Elon Musk is basically saying he will create a kind of, alternate AI where the information, source will be, different. So I don't know what will actually happen, but a lot of changes are coming. Yes.
Just to finish what I was saying earlier, and also to add to the AI issue, that's why I think ultimately it comes down to the individual. The individual, people have to do their due diligence. And is this true? Does this make sense? Let me look here. Let me look there. Because if people are believing just a random tweet from someone, then what does it say about society? Seriously.
Yeah, and it also goes back to that question about control of public space, right? And who controls this? Who sets down the rules, right?
Yeah, I think, Rick, that is a fantastic and astute observation, right? I think part of the program that we have here with the International Leadership Series is to offer up differing viewpoints to help you develop what I would say is one of the most quintessential components of going to college, the ability to develop critical thinking skills, to take a look at a tweet and say, is this the truth or not? Can I differentiate between the sources of information, right? And that is part of why we offer this up and why this year we focus on power and governance, is to offering a variety of perspectives to allow you as individuals to develop your own thought processes and evaluating the source of information you're receiving it from. Sometimes our government does limit the information that we receive, whether it's through, as we talked earlier, with some of the federal laws related to the FCC, right? So Federal Communications Commission. They got rid of some of those laws that opened up I would say the broadcasting capacity and the amount of information you receive, right? The advent of the internet created new spaces for us to kind of navigate as institutions, whether it's societal or families, right? Having to navigate that. So I think that's a great point to close us off here, Rick, for this year. Next year, we're going to focus on peace and conflict. And I think when we think about peace and conflict in a university setting across the board, we're going to really look at some critiques of not only foreign policy, something that we don't talk a lot about here in this university in particular, but we're going to look at peace and conflict within a domestic sense as well. So I really appreciate you all for coming and enjoying this final International Leadership Series conversation. So thank you all very much, and thank you.
One last thing. So the book, if you want to read the book, there's a paperback available. And if anyone is really interested, if you email me, I'll send you the PDF as well.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Mohammed.